Hello again, and welcome back once again to the Broken Past. As you can tell, we've got something a little bit different today. We have a 2DS that we're going to be working on today. Um, this video has been a little bit of work in the making. If you didn't read the title before you clicked on the video, let me show you a little bit of something that we're going to be working on today. So let me move this out of the way here, and we're going to turn this guy on. And it clicks and turns off. Obviously the battery is low, so it's red, but you can clearly see it's turning on, and then it turns right off. I'm going to give a little bit of a preview and tell you that we are going to be swapping the screen on this guy today. I know for a fact that it's a bad screen, so I have a replacement screen in here that will hopefully work for us. So a little backstory on this guy. I started this video a couple weeks ago. I actually bought it as a fixer flop video. Bought it off eBay. They said it wouldn't turn on, didn't know what was wrong. Picked it up, brought it home, turned it on, and I'll just cut to the video now and show you what I ran into. And we have light. Oh, okay. Let's see if we can... Let's see how well this actually shows up on here. Let me turn off a few of these lights here. And we can start to kind of see that the screen is broken. Perfect. So this is actually going to be awesome. We can go ahead and do a full-on screen swap while we're at it. Now we reinstall. We're starting up. Oh, and it clicked off. Okay, well, at this point, I am calling it quits until I get an RMA on the other screen and see if we can get that replaced. So as you can see from those clips, the screen itself was actually broken. You can see that the screen was cracked, turned it on, everything worked, except for just the fact that the screen was broken. And I guess if you didn't realize, even though it's a 2DS, it's still not DS really. It's not really dual screen. There's actually a single screen in here. So the screen itself was broken. As you saw from the clip, I disassembled it all the way down, got to the screen, replaced the screen, struggled with trying to figure out why this new screen wouldn't work. Finally determined that I believe it's the ribbon cable that controls either the backlight or just the general power to the screen is faulty. So the 2DS just kicks itself right back off because it runs a self-check when it turns on. So screen is bad. Contacted the vendor. They argued with me a little bit, wanted me to take it to a different repair shop to have them look at it, and finally convinced them to hey, just send me a new screen. But they said it would be about 2 months before I got the screen because it's coming from China. So I went ahead and picked up another screen on eBay, which is what I'm going to do today. So to make a long story short, rather than a fix or flop video, we are going to do a screen replacement tutorial on a 2DS today. So if you've got one that's broken and you need to know how to do that, this is definitely the video to watch. Actually replacing the screen on a 2DS is really easy. The 2DS console is kind of the handheld that I really started working on repairing. I wasn't really sure what I was doing to begin with, so I bought one of these, failed at fixing it, bought some more, fixed them all. And now I've got a whole bunch of these, but what I don't have is a red one. So when I saw this one on eBay, I thought it would be a great one to pick up and try to fix. And of course, now I know it's the screen. So let's just verify one more time what it's doing. And it kicks right off again. So, like I said, I know the screen's bad. I've tried messing with ribbon cables. I've stuck the screen in a different 2DS. I've stuck a different motherboard in here. Swapped everything around. It's 100% the screen. So let's go ahead and begin with swapping the screen. Should be a pretty quick video because these are actually super easy to do. So really all we need is a single-sized Phillips screwdriver. I use the PH0 size, and it appears to do all the screws that we need in here. So to start with, we've got our 2 screws that have some locking washers inside of them, so these screws will never come out. Just loosen them up, stick a finger under here, pull this off, and you can kind of see on the video there's a little bit of teeth marks or something here. I'm not really sure what happened, but it's definitely not affecting the usability of the console. I don't know what that was. And take our battery out. And now we have 10 Phillips screws under here that we'll need to take out. All of them are the exact same size. We don't need to worry about making sure we know which screw goes where. All these are exactly the same. So we'll just take them all out and set them off to the side. Just making sure I grabbed all of them because I didn't bother counting. All right, so at this point, there are 2 small latches down here at the bottom that kind of help clip the whole thing in place. So we're just going to take a fingernail. We can see there's also a small dent in here from wherever they must have dropped it last time. Just stick a finger under here, just slide it across, and we'll disengage those. Now at this point, we don't want to just pull the back cover off because there's a ribbon cable that runs up to these 2 back cameras. So we're just going to slide it up and kind of pivot it off. And we'll see our ribbon cable here. And from this point, we just flip up the tab. And then, of course, it partly came out now, but let's grab my tweezers and slide it off. And set that off to the side. So I guess it's important to mention too while we're at it, all the screws are the same size, but because they are so small, we need to make sure that we use the right size screwdriver and that we get a good grip on the screw because these screws do strip pretty easy. I've got one 2DS that had a couple strip screws when I got it, and I had to ultimately drill out the holes for it. So just make sure that you've got a good quality bit and a good quality bite, I guess, on the screw before you try to loosen it, because you definitely don't want to strip those. So at this point, we've got some extra little plastic pieces here to come off. We've got our SD cover slot, and on this side we have the volume slider. These will just all come off for now and set them off to the side. And we have our 2 shoulder buttons. Now these shoulder buttons are just sitting in there, but they have a spring that gives them the kickback after you push it down. So the springs are usually in there pretty well, but just make sure you kind of have to bend everything to get them out. So just make sure you don't lose the spring as you remove the shoulder buttons from the console. And lastly, we have the power jack and the game cartridge slot. This actually will not come out. There's 2 small screws here that are different than the rest. We need to keep these 2 separate. But this will come out once the whole board is loosened. So usually at this point, I will simply remove, we have 6 ribbon cables we need to remove. We've got the 2 here that have to do with the front screen, or the main display, I guess. One thing to keep in mind, I've had a couple different instances with broken screens that have had different sort of different results of it. I've had an instance where you turn the screen on and you can see it's clearly cracked and no big deal. I've had other instances where when you turn it on, it clicks off kind of like this one does. And I've had another instance where I turned it on and the screen was black. The light came on, but I had no sound, no backlight, no anything. If you run into an instance where it shuts off, or where you've got maybe the light but no display, try removing this ribbon cable. If you simply remove this, slide up the cover, the clip, and remove the ribbon cable, in those 2 other instances, I've had it where it then properly booted the console, and then I was able to see that the screen had defects in it. So just something to keep in mind for a troubleshooting step. It's really easy to just remove this one. Just take the battery, hold it here, try to turn it back on, and just see what it does. In this case, I've tested that it makes no difference, which is why I believe the issue is actually on this tiny ribbon cable right here in this corner. So we've got the ribbon cable here, which is the switch for the home button. We have the ribbon cable here, which is for the digitizer. And we have this ribbon cable here, which, like I said, I believe this is for the power or the backlight for the display itself. And then we also have the ribbon cable up here, which is obviously for the circle pad. And then the 2 ribbon cables for the display. So these are all pretty easy to simply just slide up and use the tweezers and just pull those out. And you can use tweezers for these. I just usually use a fingernail. They're not too bad. Obviously be super careful because we don't want to break the plastic clips in the process. But just kind of slide right on out. Then I'll usually just push them back down for now, since we're ultimately going to have to remove the whole motherboard for this process. And lastly, we have the circle pad. Now, at this point, we have 12 of these screws holding the motherboard in place, plus the 2 screws up here for this front cover. So I'll start with these 2. Again, these are different than the others. You can find them later. They're shorter than all the other ones, but it's easier just to kind of keep them separate, so you don't have to go hunting for them later. And now we have these 12 screws to remove. Okay, so at this point, we'll start by lifting up the top just a little bit to loosen up. So I gotta make sure I got them all. Yep, okay. So loosen the top just a little bit. So this top cover comes off. And then the whole motherboard will come up and then slide out that way. So that way these ribbon cables will come out from underneath there. So we'll go ahead and do that now. Keeping in mind, we do have some of these cables down here that can get snagged in the process. So we'll just make sure that those aren't getting stuck. And the whole thing slides up and off. And I'm going to sit it over here out of the way. So here we have our various button covers, the microphone cover, our circle pad, some of the LED diffusers. We are going to have to remove the circle pad because this actually sits over part of the display. So we just have to remove basically half of the circle pad. It's actually a really pretty easy process just to get this out of the way for now. And then he will just kind of pull up. Get your finger under there a little bit and come right off. And now the whole rest of the circle pad is still in there, and it's held in by a couple washers and a plastic clip. So this is the only thing that we're taking out for now. I'm going to set him back here. And now I'm going to go ahead and just hold off on that for a second. And I'm going to bring our new screen, which is actually interestingly cut out of there. Okay, so looking at this one's kind of interesting. This is different than the other ones. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to be an issue. Taking a look at this here. So you can see on here, this one has this plastic cover. I'm not sure how well it's actually showing up in video. Let me actually move this up here. There's a small plastic cover that goes all the way around this guy. And I believe that just acts as an insulator, protecting the back of the motherboard from the screen, which this is just plastic with no electrical insulation on it at all. So there's a little bit of something here, but that's just part of this protector for shipping. So I believe it's actually the first time I've run into that. So I believe we are going to need to take this guy and move it over to here. I'm not sure how difficult that is to get out of there. So let's take a look on the process. I'm going to kind of wiggle this guy, which he's not too tight since I've been doing a lot of troubleshooting with this guy. But he is held in place with double-sided electrical tape on the front, which we are going to need to transfer this to this as well. But let's see. Let's go ahead and move this out of the way. I don't want to get that screen or the tape all dirty, so let's go ahead and just sit him in here for the moment. And how hard is this plastic to get off of here? So I guess we're going to learn together. One of the issues is you might not have this insulating plastic on the back, which kind of stinks. It is not going to come off the greatest, but hopefully it is definitely very, very sticky. Set that there. Go ahead and I guess take this whole protective piece off. I'm going to go ahead and sit the display back on it for now. And it's always an adventure. You never know what you might run into. And pretty sure it doesn't need to be perfect because a lot of the edge is not going to be in contact with the board. I'll just slide that on there. And then apparently they also have two small pieces down here. Hopefully we can get a fingernail under here. There's one. So your mileage may vary. Most likely you won't have to do this. This is actually the first screen that I've actually had to do this on. But if you do, I guess now you see what you need to do. All right. And lastly, we have the top double-sided sticky tape, which this is already removed off of the old screen and moved onto this one. So we'll remove it again. And I don't know why, it always seems like these are really dirty here on the bottom, down there at the very bottom of the console. So it's not part of my last replacement process. It's just always dirty on this side. I don't know why. I guess that maybe that's just where the dust is able to get into the console. So we'll try to do this without, if we can, without ripping any of the tape. If we do, it's not a big deal. It doesn't need to be in one big piece because it'll go back on anyway, but try to also not stick it to itself. Kind of get part of the pieces lined up here. And it is definitely very sticky. It really likes to just like that. Once it falls into place, it kind of doesn't move until you remove a whole bunch of it off there. So. And there we go. Let's move some of this wrapping. This guy back in place. I don't think there's anything on there. Clean off some of the fingerprints that I got on the new screen. And let's get this back in the center of the screen now. And we'll slide it down underneath of these ribbon cables. And this guy appears to be a little wider. This is obviously not an OEM screen, so there might be some slight sizing differences. Oh, there we go. And I lost this guy. Just pops right back in there. All right, and now, since we've swapped the screen out, we simply begin the reassembly process. So the first step is to take our circle pad and put it back into place. If we can see on the video here, there's a slight rectangular shape here, so we need to make sure that this plastic washer is aligned roughly the same way up and down. So what that means is when we get this guy in place, that he will simply connect. I'm going to double check, make sure it's centered, make sure it actually went in the hole and didn't push it off to the side, which it was fine. And take our two screws and put it back into place. And we're now on the home stretch. So, make sure all these are still sitting back centered where they should be. And we're going to take our board. And what I usually do here, so we got to worry about the speaker. The speaker likes to get caught on the back of the screen. So I'll usually see if hopefully it's getting it from the top camera. But I'll kind of start the process, get it just above the two ribbon cables so I can kind of pull them up and position them on the board. And then from there, slide the whole thing down, keeping in mind this new ribbon cable here at the bottom that won't have a curve in it yet. So it needs to slide up through this bottom piece, which I'm still fighting with the speaker. There we go. Rotate it a little bit so I can get better access to it here. And everything will begin to just drop into place. And again, the speaker doesn't always like to fit perfectly, so you just have to wiggle a little bit. And before we push everything down, we have to remember that this plate goes underneath, and those two screws will line up nicely on both sides. So I'll start by securing the top plate in there just to make sure it's all going to fit. Both screws. Oops. And occasionally, which just happened to me now, the circle pad ribbon cable will get stuck under there. And before I attach all the ribbon cables, I'll go ahead and put all 12 of these screws in just to make sure that the board is nice and secure before trying to wiggle those ribbon cables in place. And actually, before I loosen that one up, I also see here that these other two, actually looks like all three of mine got stuck under here. So let's take this guy and feed him back up. And the home button and the digitizer. So just a few things just to kind of look at as you're putting it all back together. And these screws don't need to be terribly tight, just roughly hand tight, and you kind of feel it, this catch. And to know which holes the screws need to go into, they're not going to go into any of these red pieces sticking out. These are for the back case. They will simply go into these that kind of have a lighter hole drilled out of them. So I'll finish with the rest of these, and I'll be right back. All right, so as you kind of saw, I had to wiggle this one out. This screw likes to sort of interfere with this one. If you want to, you could go ahead and attach this ribbon cable first. I just usually just move it out of the way. And now we begin reattaching all of our cables. So the same way, we flipped up the flap, and these will just slide right on in, and then drop the flap back down. So we have the home button done. Our digitizer. Now, the power button here, or the power for the display, is always a bit tricky on the new screens because it doesn't have that original bend to it. So this one's always a little finicky the first time to make sure we get it positioned just right. That actually went in pretty well. Now our displays. And these are bigger, so they're a little bit trickier, but usually just slide right in without too much effort. You'll go in until these little sort of cutouts on both sides of the display. They'll just slide right in, and they'll bump up next to the connector, and then you know that it's in all the way. And at this point, probably the hardest cable to put in is that circle pad cable, which if you wanted to, you could remove the circle pad with the motherboard. I've seen some instructions that say to do that. I prefer not to because I don't want this dangling off to the side. But if you can see that the ribbon cable for the circle pad goes out and it folds under itself and then goes left towards the connector. So usually just give it that slight bend and kind of feed it towards there, and it usually goes in not too bad. Okay, we are almost done. So I am actually going to do one thing here real quick. I'm going to go ahead, and there's these two metal pieces right here. They're usually in there pretty tight, but because I've messed with this console quite a bit, they've kind of loosened up. I'm going to pull those out just for a moment. That helps to align the side components, but I don't want them to fall out, because what I'm going to do now is grab my battery, and I'm just going to hold it into place, and I'm going to hope that this test goes better than the last test. Last time I tried putting this together. And we're going to push the power button, and fingers crossed, the new display works. So let's give it a shot. And oh, there's the backlight. And there we go. We have ourselves a display. That is, that's so much better than the last time we tried this. So perfect. That is awesome news. And as you can tell, I obviously have not yet attached the rear cameras, and it boots just fine without that. So it's a real easy way to do a quick test without having to put it all back together. So let's go ahead and put our pins back into these slots. And we'll grab our SD card rail. Set that in there. Now the volume rail is a little bit trickier just because we need to make sure that the volume properly sits on the volume button. Oh, and as I can also tell, I have an issue with my, there we go, the sleep button. I didn't have that positioned right. So you can just verify, and usually if it's not in there right, you can just wiggle it and it'll drop everything down and drop the switch into place. But back to the volume button, we'll make sure that it's sitting properly in here. And we've got to remember everything is upside down with the way we're looking at the console. So we simply sit this in a position and make sure that our volume button is not quite in alignment. There we go. So the top of the volume button, or the top of the slider, has a notch out of it. And let's see, actually, let's move that closer to the camera here. Let's see. So the top of the volume has a little notch there, and that sits right on the actual physical slider. So once that's in line, everything just kind of falls into place. And now we have our shoulder buttons. Usually the way that I've done these is I will slide them into place, being careful not to knock out these side rails. And when they're in place, you can maybe see from the video that the spring is obviously not into position. So I'll usually just hold it, grab my tweezers, and might take an attempt or two to push it back far enough that it will clip onto the peg right on the bottom, and it sits in place. So we'll do the same with this guy. Trying to do this around the camera, which is always a little bit trickier. Let me rotate this so I can see it better. Go. And again, take our spring. And if you're watching this video going, you said that was going to be an easy fix. It really is not bad. It's not translating well in the video. Once you've done it once or twice, it sort of becomes just habit on how to put the rest of it together, but not a big deal. Something I should mention before I put the rest of the back on. This is a model FTR-20. See if we can show it here on the camera again. I believe there's two versions of it, the FTR-20 and the FTR-001. The 001 looks a whole lot different as far as like the way the board looks. Everything is silkscreen, so they've got notes everywhere for resistors and capacitors and all sorts of stuff on here. So when you first open it up, it's going to look like a lot. Secondly, it has a separate Wi-Fi board that plugs in right in this area, and then it has an antenna that they've kind of taped here and it runs up and sits up here in the top. There's part of this motherboard that's knocked out on the original one. The antenna, the antenna just sits right in there. So, nothing really crazy. Once you get to this point, basically you put it all back together and you'll just slide the antenna right in there and then clip the Wi-Fi chip right into its socket here. It's pretty simple. Just if you open it up to replace yours and you see something different, just keep in mind you might have that. but it's super obvious how it's connected together. But just make sure that that Wi-Fi chip is fully inserted, because that will prevent the console from booting if it's not connected all the way. So just something to keep in mind. And lastly, at this point, we put the back cover on. And again, we kind of have to worry a little bit about this ribbon cable. It is a fairly fragile ribbon cable, but I usually just kind of follow the bend and kind of keep it all into place. And it'll just kind of sit right in there. Hopefully we catch this on one of the cameras. And then just kind of hold it in place, clip it down, and then the whole back will just rotate to the right and sit into position. So we'll clip it down, clip the bottom pieces down here, and now we're on the last part of the home stretch. So we have our 10 screws here to put in. Again, not a lot of pressure. Sometimes they take a moment to start, but you'll kind of feel it bite and start going into the plastic. And again, these are all the same size, so just go ahead and get all 10 screws installed. Okay, and our battery clips right in. And finally, the back cover. This one is a little bit finicky because of those dents on that side, but slide it in. Didn't quite get that cover in all the way. Kind of on autopilot here, and I missed getting that in there. Both of them in. There we are. And there we have it. So let's do one final check, and let's just make sure everything's working as expected. Of course, the battery's almost dead now. Hopefully that'll last us. And we're on. That's working. Let's bring up the camera. And we can see the rear camera is working. And the front camera is also working. And of course the volume works. We'll check the circle pad as well. And everything is working exactly as expected. So, took 2 times of making the video. Second time worked like a champ. We now have a awesome, pretty good condition red console. I guess the home button works already too because I'm on the home screen. So yeah, pretty easy repair. Not a lot of steps. Some things to keep in mind, but overall, like I said, these are such cheap consoles. You can probably pick up a broken one for 20 bucks. If the screen's broken, it's another 25 bucks, unfortunately. But it's a pretty cheap way to, to get your feet wet and trying to repair a console and have at it. It's easy to get to, not as complicated as running ribbon cables for the DSs and DS Lites and all that good stuff. So yeah, works like a champ. This is awesome. I'm happy to have a functioning red one now. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hopefully this tutorial was helpful. Leave a comment in the comments down below if you try to tackle this and how it went for you, and post links to pictures if you want to as well. I'd be happy to see what you've done with yours as well. So thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.